Welcome to Deep Look, Multi-World's weekly show about the current state of Ultimate, and we're going global as we follow up on the World Ultimate Championships this week. Keith Rayner, joined by friend of the show, occasional co-host, and Ulti-World senior editor, Edward Stevens. And we got a lot to talk about today, especially following up on Worlds, but we'll even come back to the US, talk basically as local as possible. Like, we're going full zoom out on the Google Maps and then just like turn that dial all the way back up to talk about even sectionals. We've got a little bit of everything coming your way. Edward, how are you feeling post Worlds? I know we didn't physically travel there, but spiritually, I feel like, we just got back from a big flight.
Spiritually, we did. And I want to thank commentator Liam Grant for the shout out he made right before the women's final started to all the people watching all over the world. He named a bunch of people by name and where they were watching. And then he gave a shout out to the Ulti-World Discord, which is, of course, where we were active. But yeah, I feel like I watched 10 straight days of Ultimate between Worlds and Pro Champs. And then as a little icing on the cake, I played a couple days of sectionals myself. So I am beat. What about you?
I guess that means I'll give you the pass for not opting to soldier on through the finals. For those of us who pushed back the clock and stayed up late to watch the women's division final and stuck it out in the Discord, I salute you. I was there with you in the trenches and suffered the consequences the next morning. But all in all, it was a great experience to have a tournament that ran all week, and that was really the centerpiece of attention, even if it wasn't always the only event going on. And we didn't quite get to the levels of World Games, but that's to be expected. Like, we were really close to hitting that. You are in the mix, kind of the way people feel about like March Madness when it comes around. You have like a month-long celebration of Ultimate, and that early rounds of March Madness, it's all anybody's talking about. And this is Ultimate's version of that in some ways. It's a week of everybody is focused on the same thing, and it feels really celebratory of the best players in the world, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and there were even some almost Cinderella stories. It was just hard to keep track of it all at once. That was my only complaint. I needed a time turner.
Well, let's jump into it. I mean, we got to start with the big headline that nobody wants to hear. It's the bad news. Bad news coming your way. USA sweeps at the World Ultimate Championships. Come in, win in every division. and in many of those divisions, not close. I mean, the open final was a laugher. 15-4. Absolute blowout in the open final. The mixed final, not better, more compelling, but not really that much closer in the final tallies. So not really. The U.S. gets the win over Canada in the mixed division. That final was 15-8, closer in the first half, but a big pull away. But the big story, of course, is going to be the women's division final, which was an incredibly dramatic contest. The rematch between Colombia and USA after Colombia got the win in power pools earlier in the weekend. And this was a slugfest of a final, but the U.S. able to grind it out at the very end, come up with some clutch plays. There's some controversy to this game as well. I mean, there's a lot to chew on with this women's division final between the U.S. and Colombia. The U.S. winning 14-12 in the final in that one. Edward, where do we even start with this classic of a game?
I think we start right there with what you just said. It was a classic of a game. It's one of my favorite games that I have ever watched. It featured two teams who have been at the top of the world division in the women's division for 5-8 years at this point. And they were on a collision course for the final, and they delivered. There were incredible throws to start. Gina throwing that huck that just kind of tailed right away from the help defense for Manu. Anna Nazarov dipping low for those shotgun inside forehands. There were great defensive plays. There were lead changes. There were strategy adjustments. I feel like anybody who enjoys Ultimate, that's like the ideal game for them.
Tremendous star performances, obviously, from both teams, but particularly the Colombians. Manuela Cardenas, Gina Cartagena, and Valeria Cardenas leading the way as they did throughout the tournament and playing almost every point at some points during this game. They were the faces of the Colombian team, and rightfully so. It was really exciting to see Gina Cartagena kind of like really grip onto her status as one of the truly great players in the world. As it kind of felt like she had handed the keys over to the younger generation with the Colombian players, but was absolutely dominant at this tournament. And the U.S. big performance. You mentioned Anna Nazaroff, 5 assists in the game, clearly leading the U.S. in that category. Claire Trope also tremendous, 2 goals, 2 assists, and a lot of defense that doesn't show up on the stat sheet with a really brutal matchup between her and Manuela, where you could tell both athletes were giving it their all and were running out of steam, but still just digging to find more and more. So really a tremendous game, very physical. There were plenty of mistakes. This is not a pristine game of Ultimate by any means, but the drama and the grittiness involved, it's very easy to watch this game back and be like, oh, I feel really emotionally invested in this outcome. I sense both the stakes from the players on the field, but also the setup, the narratives leading into it. Like those stakes are very clear, and the way the players are playing backs that up. So I love that. I think that it was a great game from a storytelling standpoint and a tremendous show from the women's division. And what was the marquee matchup? I mean, this was the game everybody wanted to see. It was a titanic clash. Two teams that have been awesome throughout the tournament, that have a history. This was the appointment viewing. And for those of you who stayed up late or who came back and caught it, I think you were rewarded with a great game. Not everyone necessarily was thrilled with the way the game played out. I do think we should mention briefly, as an aside, that after the game, the coach of the Colombian women's national team and a longtime architect of this program, Mauricio Moore, who's coached the Revolution group for a long time, a number of women's national teams, actually posted a video on his Instagram stating that he was really displeased with the level of physicality, to the point where he was using the term violence on the part of the U.S. in the final. Some pretty strong language from Mauricio saying that this was a trend that he had seen over time and that he had been directing attention towards. He had offered complaints, feedback about it, including during the game, felt ignored by the U.S., who continued to play physically. A number of Colombian players were injured during the game, whether by contact from the U.S. or by other means. I think that probably had an impact on how Mauricio felt about it. And there were certainly some very physical plays during the game, things that you might see carded in USA Ultimate Play. I don't know, where people quite stand on it. He later deleted the post yesterday, so we actually were in the process of trying to pull that video to show you on the podcast that he deleted it. I don't know, if maybe somebody tipped him off that we were coming to collect the receipts, but it's no longer up either way. That video, maybe he'll repost or something like that. But he said, "This is my opinion. This does not represent the organization's opinion or the team's opinion or anything like that." You can see the spirit scores. But he was in no uncertain terms saying the U.S. needs to be called out for the level of physicality that they're dishing out and endangering their opponents. Edward, what was your takeaway from watching that?
Yeah, I don't knock him necessarily for having that opinion, but I don't agree. I think it was a physical game from both sides and an appropriately physical game from both sides. Most of the contact I saw was sort of the shoulder to shoulder jostling variety, or offensive players trying to get into a space the defense was already occupying. We saw Valeria make a cut in the end zone straight into Caroline Tornquist's chest and call a foul, but Tornquist was just there and had the position. We saw that pull play, which was a much bigger collision where Claire Trope was in the lane and was lining up a deep run. And Manu essentially staked out a position on the field, preventing her from taking a diagonal cross-field route, essentially to funnel her toward the skinny side and low side of the field and force a throw to have to go that way. And Trope, turned and ran without realizing that Manu had planted her feet in the space a half second or a second earlier. I think Trope, because she wasn't watching the whole time, thought that maybe Manu had jumped right as she made her turn, but it didn't look like that on replay. Those were like the most physical moments, but I think they were really fair from the defense and just kind of an offense assuming a space was there that wasn't there in the moment. Outside of that, there was the late moment where Valeria Cardenas had to come out of the game, taking an injury after Angela Zhu made a split-second decision to bid on one of her undercuts. In hindsight, it was the wrong decision. She ended up landing kind of on Valeria's ankle, and Valeria's landing got messed up. She looked like she was holding her arm as she came off the field because of the way she twisted on the fall. But it's hard to say that Zhu, that was a cardable play. That was a cardable, dangerous play, but there was certainly nothing violent about it. And in my mind, it was the only moment that stands out where a player on either team was just kind of clearly in the wrong on the level of physicality. And it was the kind of thing where it was just such a quick decision she had to make that you don't like the way it ended up, but I can't get mad at her about that. What do you think, Keith?
I actually I'm kind of on the other side of this. I think Mauricio was going to extremes. He had some parallels that I thought were patently ridiculous and kind of undercut his point. Maybe part of why he ended up removing the video. But I also think that upon rewatching the game itself, that even the specific instances that you're naming, I think I view them differently. I think that the Angela Zhu plays, like you mentioned, that second one was cardable. I think the first one was cardable, maybe even more so than the second bid. And the fact that you have two in the same game is somewhat problematic. That's the point of the card system, is to help players rein it in. It was an intense game. It was competitive. Colombia plays physically. So I think it was clear from the patterns of the US that was their approach. But I think they were being a bit reckless. The Tornquist play and the Trope play where Trope charges into Manu trying to make a deep cut. I think both those plays, I understand the U.S. player's perspective. I think that they were fouls on the U.S. That Tornquist play looks really good, but if you really slow it down, Tornquist steps forward at the last moment and kind of gives it away. I think she probably could have made that moment without the foul, but I think she ended up fouling Valeria in what is a minor situation. I don't think it's a big deal one way or the other. I don't fault either player for their decisions in that moment. But I think that over the course of a game, there are multiple instances I can think of Abby Chang and Claire Chastain both running into the thrower as they tried to pursue a player who beat them into upline space and running into the thrower as the thrower pivoted. And those kinds of things are not really a big deal. But in the aggregate, it definitely felt like the U.S. was a little bit out of control and was okay with having those fouls occur because there were so many of them. There were so many instances of contact of that nature. So I think that I see Mauricio's gripe here. I think that U.S. probably crossed the line during the game, and there's a lot to it that we don't know. He says that there was feedback and conversations during the game, and the U.S. wasn't responsive to that. I think that would be a much bigger problem, but we don't really know the nature of those or what that was like. We also don't know how much of this is a trend from the U.S. playing over the course of the game. I know there was also some bad plays from the U.S. during their power pool game. So I can see where Mauricio's coming from. I don't think it rises to, I think choosing to use the words violence implies some sort of malice and intent that I don't see from the U.S. Recklessness and intent, where do you draw the line on those? How important is one versus the other when you're looking at outcomes? I don't know. I don't want to get too deep into the murk here, but I do think that it was a very physical game, and the U.S. probably crossed the line a little bit in my mind. And I think those Angela Zhu bids were probably the part that most people will take away from that. But yeah, I don't know that I necessarily see the full, we need to, it almost felt like Mauricio's like calling for the U.S. to be investigated or something or sanctioned, which I think that seems a little beyond the pale for what we saw in the film. But I do think when the U.S. team goes back and watches, they may feel like, okay, there are some plays here that we wish we had handled differently, and some moments that we would wish we had handled differently. And I think it's really frustrating that there were so many injuries. Uribe went out early in the game. Uh, Ospina had a couple of different bumps and bruises with players. Ultimately, was injured on a bid of her own, and so she might have not been 100%. Hard to know how those other contacts impacted her eventual overall health. Obviously you mentioned Valeria, so that kind of stuff is frustrating. I'm sure for the coaches, it feels a little cheap for the fans to have those moments come up, but I don't necessarily think those were decisive in the game. So a lot to chew on there with what Mauricio said, and I'll be curious to see if any responses we get from folks on the American side, or if there's any additional thoughts that come from folks on the Colombian side or from WIFDIF, because this is all evolving. I mean, this kind of just dropped out of nowhere yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, I want to raise this to a level above this particular game, and I think this game is a good demonstration of it. And this is a pretty against the WIFDIF grain take, and maybe more in line with a USAU club take, or at least some of a USAU club take. But I think it's an absolute fantasy that we should expect this sport to not have contact, not have jostling, and not have bumps, tight plays, whatever. You can talk about dangerous plays, plays that affect catches being fouls. Those are 100% true. That's in the rules of the game. That's how it should be played. But I think we're just living in a world that is never going to be a reality if we expect two high-level teams who both want the disc to just be able to not touch each other all the time on the field when they're going at that speed and when they have to keep making decisions that fast. That's what I mean when I say that particular game was an appropriate level of contact. And that's kind of the level of contact I want across all high-level games, minus the dangerous bit.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what people are going to say about it, because I think that I think that there was more to come on this. It feels like this isn't just going to disappear. Do you have more thoughts? Turning back to the game itself, do you have more thoughts on the on-field action that we saw during the course of this game? I mean, it was really nip and tuck throughout the game. The U.S. is up 8-7 at the half. The second half even grindier than the first half. As things slow down a little bit, we see some exchanges of breaks. As teams were like really clawing, it could sense that the end was coming down the pipe of this game. Do you have any more thoughts on the actual on-field action?
Yeah, I mean, first off, just that it was unbelievable. Even knowing the result, I had to go to sleep while it was being played. It was, after midnight East Coast time, and I had to get up extremely early to make a drive. But I watched the game knowing the result and still couldn't believe how it unfolded. I thought, how is this second half going to play out? I was just amazed all the time at the level of effort, the sudden mistakes. And you mentioned the mistakes at not being a clean game at the beginning. I do want to put into context that at times it felt like it wasn't clean, because at so many moments of the game, it really was clean, either clean offense or defensive takeaways. And that was almost unexpected. The graphic at the beginning of the game showed that it was being played at 31 kilometer per hour winds, which is 21 miles per hour for anybody who needs a miles per hour conversion. That is an extremely high level of wind play. And we got, some drops, definitely, like 5 from the US, at least one key drop from Colombia late in the game. And there were definitely some overthrows. We saw, Gina at one point and Anna Nazarov at one point, two of the best players in the world, try to float a forehand that showed too much of the underside of the disc, and the wind carried it over the receiver. But by and large, they handled those conditions as gracefully as possible. That I think, considering the conditions, it was actually a really clean game, and all the more exciting because of it.
I second your feelings on the wind. I think that skill level of the players across all divisions really showed as we came into the late bracket stages, and the game got cleaner despite the conditions not really improving. We're going to talk more about the other finals and the other divisions, as well as the other games that we saw a lot more to talk about from the World Ultimate Championships right after our trivia question of the week, which we are coming down. Let's hit the trivia question. All right, so this week's trivia question, gotta stay worlds themed here. So we're gonna ask, we're at the chat. I see we got some folks in the chat who are expressing some thoughts about worlds right now and about the women's division final. So folks, chance to play along here at home. We're gonna ask you to try and guess the players who played for Team USA both at the 2016 World Ultimate Championships and 2024. Can you come up with all the players who cross both of those rosters? We'll see if you can. We're going to give you a little break here. Think about it, as well as Edward, and then we'll see how many we can come up with as a group and see if we can get the whole list. No peeking. Don't go pulling up the rosters. Don't go look up the articles to try and find the answer. We'll see if you got it. Coming up next in just a moment.
Hey, this is Antoine Davis. You take the field with basically two things, yourself and your cleats. That's why you need the best on your feet.
For me, I want a grip to handle my change of direction and stick with my person on defense. I want my cleat to be light to help me play long points and accelerate to get to my top speed. That's why I love my toe K cleats. They're specifically designed for Ultimate, with a cleat pattern for the game's sharp cuts and a durable, breathable, supportive build to keep your feet and ankles protected and comfortable for longer. That's why I've been using them for 3 years. They're my best ally on the field. You put your best self on the field, so make sure you're bringing the best with you at tokay-ultimate.com. That's TOKAY-ultimate.com. Tokay, sky the limits.
Whether you're gearing up for a TCT event or Summer League, YCC competition or Masters, Breakmark can help your team get kitted out. Their bundles get you everything your team needs, and each one comes with a free reversible and 5-panel hat. Whatever your game, Breakmark.com is the place to get your team ready this season. Welcome back to Deep Look. Getting ready to wrap up our trivia question of the week, which is, can you guess all the players who played on the 2016 WC teams for Team USA and the 2024 team? Who's a crossover? The chat is already hard at work coming up with some answers. Edward, you got any help for them? You got any help for the chat?
Well, I haven't looked at the chat. I've been keeping my eyes away from it, but I'll name some names and we can see if the chat can fill in the rest, or if we can mutually help each other. You ready for me?
Yeah, hit me.
All right. Let's start with Anna Nazarov, Carolyn Finney, Sarah Meckstroth, Raha Mozaffari, Claire Chastain, Khalif El Salam, Chris Kocher, Trent Dillon, and this is where I start to run out of steam here.
It's pretty good so far. Pretty good so far.
I think I'm 7 for 7. I've got a starting line for a mixed team.
All right, I'm gonna give
what's in the chat
people
right now,
a few
Keith?
seconds to think of some more. So I think you covered everybody that's in the chat. Trent Dillon, Khalif El Salam, Claire
Oh, I got
Chastain,
one.
Sarah Mextroff, Anna Nazaroff, Chris Kocher.
Kayla Helton. I believe she was Jorgensen back then.
Yeah, I actually think I may have missed her because of the last name change. I think I may have missed her on my list because of that. I can round it out for you, I think. So here we go. And these are other names that I have. Amber Sinacrope.
Yeah.
Eli Kearns. Jack Hatchett. I think that's just about, that might be everybody. That might be the full. Cami Groom. Did we say Cami?
I did not say Cami.
We might have
Somehow
missed
I didn't say
so
Cami.
Cami, an obvious one. I'll even give you a bonus points. You said Rory Tickham because she was a player back in 2016, a coach this time around. I think she's the only person who crossed the line. There are certainly coaches who were with both, but I'll give the extra points since she was a player in one of those two. So that's about the full list, I think, unless somebody's got one we missed. That is your trivia question of the week this week. Thank you for playing along. And hey, if you enjoyed the coverage of the World Ultimate Championships this past weekend, it was over 2 weekends, really. If you enjoyed all of this incredible Ultimate that you brought, make sure to hit like and subscribe. Make sure to give a thumbs up on the video. Really helps us out. I want to move to the other finals at least briefly and talk about some of the other odds and ends from the tournament. Starting in the mixed division as the more interesting of the two finals. USA, as we mentioned, getting the 15-8 win over Canada, whose semifinal game I think was probably the more fascinating matchup against France. But USA able to take control in the second half of their final, 8-6 at the half, but they dominate in the second half. Really kind of solved Canada's zones by the end of it, and they go down. Noah Backer with a 4 assists, Anna Thompson 3 goals in the matchup to lead the way for the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, that was a pretty enjoyable game to watch. We saw the USA run away with it at the end. But the performances, especially in the first half when it was tight, I loved seeing the energy with which Anna Thompson and Mika Kurahashi, for each side in particular, kind of attacked the field. I don't know if Anna Thompson gets enough credit now that she's on Fury in American Club, which is sort of famously a many hands make light work sort of team, mentality-wise. But she's a takeover player, and she showed it with this mixed squad. I mean, this is a team chock full of stars, and Anna Thompson is going out there and saying, give me the rock. That's my disc. It belongs to me first, and then it belongs to whoever else I deign to throw it to. That's over the top, but I feel like we see that attitude from her on offense and defense, and I love to see it. Not quite the same style of play on the other side from Mika Kurahashi, but she was beasting in the lanes and putting up some nice throws too. I'm used to her operating mostly downfield and making plays on both sides of the disc downfield, but she did some tremendous work behind the disc this weekend. And yeah, the U.S. made some mistakes early. They came out slightly flat. Canada were in the game. They slowed down the U.S. attack some with that zone that had worked so well for them against France. And yeah, I don't know, solid game. I liked it. And it wasn't plagued by any of the spirit issues that had been an issue for Canada in their previous 2 bracket games, which was nice to see as well.
The U.S., I think, in the end, just the more talented side. I mean, they just had stars who were role players for them. And I think that was tough for Canada to match up with. And Canada really needed their zone to be successful. And the U.S., I feel like kind of had the answer for that. It stinks for Canada. No Gagan Chotha, who got injured really early in the tournament. He might have been arguably their best player. So not being able to have him, obviously a big impact. But you're totally right about Mika Kurahashi. The more I watch her play, the more I enjoy watching her play. She's a very fluid athlete. She's crisp and just really aesthetically plays the game in a way that makes it look really beautiful. I would also say I'm so happy to get to watch more Eleanor Young. I loved watching her at UBC. She is so dynamic. She's explosive. I love watching her play. She's a really exciting player, and getting to see her on a big stage is a lot of fun. But this Canada team, really interesting to me. They get the win over France in semifinals, where they kind of break out this second half or second 2/3 of the game zone where they're matching up players. So it's kind of like a box and one kind of scenario, and take over the game that way, completely lock up France. Really smartly coached. Shout out to our friend Danny Proby for the designing the strategy behind the team. And also to me, really fascinating, this Justin Podnar thing. Player added late to the roster, I think, as an injury sub, and comes in and becomes like the centerpiece of their offense and also one of their most valuable defensive players. I think it'd be hard to argue that he wasn't their most important player throughout the weekend on the field. 3 goals and an assist and a block in the final was just all over the field for them, and really had a tremendous performance. I think they said he's only like 21 or something. So he has a long way to continue to grow as a player, but really influential for him after showing up with a team that he wasn't necessarily expected to compete with. So really interesting to me to see how this Canada team came through. And we've spent plenty of time talking about the collapse of Canada on the international stage lately, and the Canada mixed team was having none of it. Knocked over the much ballyhooed French team, and a pretty good bracket. We also had Japan and Australia give us some real fireworks in the quarterfinals as well. Australia finishing 4th overall after just narrowly winning that Japan game, and I think what was one of the games of the tournament. Any other thoughts before we look at Open?
Sure. Yeah, I want to shout out a couple more players on each team. You're right. Justin Podnar was a great surprise. I also want to shout out how surprised again for the second sort of big major tournament in a row I was to see Maddie Ong take the field. She tore her ACL late in the American college season. She was playing with the Canadian University of British Columbia, but came back and played at college nationals with less mobility and played here in the final and threw one of those beautiful OI forehand darts that she throws so well to Mika Kurahashi. So shout out to Maddie for playing through a pretty significant injury recovery. And on the American side, it was really cool to see Marquez Brownlee get the bookends to end the game. He blew up that dump set with a block and then caught the game-winning score on kind of a running transition counter. Got to celebrate. And it was just a really, it was mostly a team-wide effort from the U.S., but it was great to see players step up in big ways. I thought Ben Dameron had a really nice final as well.
Yeah, some folks in the chat asking if we could talk about the likes of India and Singapore, who seem like they've been on the up and up. An awesome weekend for India. They were one of the most fun stories from the tournament. It's unfortunate that one of their star players was not able to play in the back half of the tournament. They had an injury to Krishna Damore. I think they could have potentially been a spoiler. I don't know if they would have made a run to semifinals or anything like that, but I think quarterfinals was definitely in the cards for India. And it's worth noting that Karan Sharma led the mixed division in goals and also led the division in assists. So really showed out for India with an MVP performance for that team. And I think they look like they've advanced a lot since the last time we saw them play in a major international competition. Singapore, a team we kind of had our eye on. We had them 10th in our power rankings coming into the tournament. But we knew that they had some potential ceiling with what we've seen from their development at the youth and under 24 levels. They ended up finishing 6th overall. So strong weekend from them. They lost to an Italy team that I think we felt like was a little bit of a disappointment given what we thought they could do. But I think the depth of the mixed division in particular really stood out. I think we saw teams even at the bottom of the bracket play better than I had expected given the really challenging conditions that they were facing. Why don't we shift over to Open now? Open final, absolute domination. The easy to root for Japanese heroes who fought their way through the incredibly difficult bracket to get to the final. Felt like maybe they had some magic maybe they could throw a wrench in the U.S. with their unusual style of play. That was not to be. The U.S. absolutely dominating that game. Japan with a tremendous semifinal where they were really dominant against Australia in a way I don't think anybody saw coming. And that's after their ridiculous comeback from down 14-11 against Belgium to win that game 15-14 in another one of the most memorable moments of the tournament, them coming back and winning that game. So an incredible effort for Japan. Unfortunate that the final itself was not that compelling as the U.S. just absolutely crushed.
Yeah, I mean, we got this one wrong when we set the line at -4.5, and I hammered the over. one of my worst calls of all time, and I've made some bad ones. One of the things about the game that stuck out to me is how Japan, perhaps sensing that they needed to make a statement or relieve some of the pressure on their unders and insides early, worked the game to one-on-one matchups. And, when you throw a downwind huck to Taiyo Arakawa with steps, you feel pretty good about it. But when you're throwing an upwind huck to Arakawa or Hana and they have to take on one of the larger U.S. defenders in kind of a standstill situation and the disc is hanging and turning, that just doesn't seem like the right game plan. Maybe you take one shot like that, but the way Japan went to the well over and over again was shocking to me, frankly, because it deviated so far from what had been going well for them when they were winning in the tournament, let alone what they probably should have done against a U.S. team that's going to come down with so many more jump balls.
20 blocks in the final for the Americans, 3 from Michael Ng. Cam Warner had 2 after he missed much of the tournament and then came back and had 2 gigantic blocks in the semifinals and then had at least one big one, if not 2 in this one. I remember him getting one kind of chased down on a floater. But yeah, Japan's execution wasn't there in the conditions, and the U.S. was far too athletic and tall for that to be an optimal strategy. And the U.S. defense was absolutely phenomenal throughout the tournament, and they didn't really let up at all. Final, if anything, they just kept rolling. We had an interesting discussion about who was the best performer on the American team in the Discord, and it was really fun to see that there were so many different answers to who that was, and they came through and ran the table at the tournament without Christian Boxley, who you could argue is their highest profile player coming into the tournament. So very, very impressive stuff from the Americans. Any other thoughts from the open division?
Just that I'm sorry that we didn't get to see Belgium at least reach a semifinal. I'm not sorry Japan came back and won that game, but I sure would have liked to see Belgium with a chance against Australia or the U.S. with everything on the line. I think Toby de Krena in particular was having a tremendous tournament, and I just wanted to see more of him, and I wanted to see him against defenders like Michael Ng and Cam Warner and Troy Holland and AJ Merriman. I wanted to see which way that matchup went. And shout out Germany. I know they kind of got dogged a little bit by Australia there, but well, they showed a lot of promise too. Stefan Derscher had a really good tournament. I'm very intrigued to see what their World Games male matching side looks like.
Yeah, I had the same thought. I was not high on the German team, given that they were missing some kind of key names from the German Open scene coming into the tournament. But they really showed up to play. Lucas McClamrock, who's an American player who plays with Chain Lightning and with the Atlanta Hustle, he was awesome for them. What a pickup for the Germans. But they obviously had a really Doscher was great for them. Nico Mueller, Konrad Schlor, like names that but this team was the real deal. I thought they looked every bit as good as the other top bracket teams. After the US, I think the Germans were in that next tier with Japan and GB and Australia and Belgium, and probably Canada. Shout out to Quinn Snyder leading the division in goals. He tied for that with I think Toby DeCrana. But yeah, not a ton of surprises, I guess, in the Open division aside from Japan. I don't know what happened to Australia in that semifinal. I was shocked by their performance, and Japan just totally on it on the other end, not letting them up at all. But yeah, just disappointing end, I think, for Australia, although they're going to be proud to take home a bronze in their home country. Any other Worlds thoughts?
What a great tournament. Let's do it again, and let's not wait 8 years till the next one.
Well, we probably should briefly talk about the World Games qualifiers, because this did impact, and in fact came down to the last moment of the tournament to decide who was going to reach the World Games. For those who don't know, it's like there's a qualification system where you get points for different successes that you have. And there were, when we came down to the stretch, there were 3 different countries that could still reach qualification in the for the tournament. So it was GB, Germany, and Italy, I believe, were the 3, or was it France? I'm trying to remember off the top of my head here.
I think it was GB, France, and Italy competing for the last 2 spots.
Got it. And so GB basically was in a spot where it was a win and in for them in the 3rd place game, and they couldn't pull it off. So that locked them out, which is a bit of a surprise given the strength of the ultimate there. But when you only get 8 teams and one of them is the host country, so there's really only 7 spots, and the US is going, so that means there's only 6 spots. They start to close up quickly, and I think it's ultimately good that we have the tournament maintains an incredibly high level, because it's hard to get into, and I think that also adds a lot of meaning. But really dramatic end to the World Games qualification process, which was a fun side side bet kind of thing, like a separate game between game, because we were talking about consolation games in a way that we often might not if it wasn't for the World Games qualification process, which to give the final counts, I believe USA, Canada, Australia, Japan, Colombia, France, and Germany, your qualifiers. GB and Italy missing out. China, the host nation, will be the other country, the People's Republic of China. So those are going to be your 8 teams for the World Games, and we're already going to start to look forward to that. Edward and I are actually going to talk about our World Games impressions, kind of do a little bit of a look ahead at what this tournament says about how teams might perform at the World Games in 2025, and also some of the players that we might be looking at to take steps forward and make the World Games teams for their respective nations. We'll be talking about that in our sub bonus. So make sure that you are subscribed if you want to hear that, as well as some of the awesome content that we had. Plus, you get access to all the videos from this past World Championships. You'll get to see so many games. I mean, we're streaming 4 games per round, so you can really get a little bit of everything. And you'll want to be in the right spot to be able to watch Field Pass and all the games from the upcoming USA Ultimate Club Championships. Yes, we are coming up towards those. I've already seen Halloween decorations in my grocery store, which means we must be getting close to Club Nationals. So exciting stuff around the corner. Speaking of Club, Edward, we've got some Club. I mean, we haven't really even gone back to Pro Champs yet, which you joined me to preview. So we got to talk a little bit of Pro Champs, and then we started the postseason. The postseason has begun, and there are some shocking results to talk about. So should be an interesting one. Let's go to Pro Champs, and I say let's go. Edward, literally, you did go to Pro Champs, so you got to see the. And where do you want to start? What was the thing that stood out to you? I think I know what the answer is, but the audience may not.
Well, for me, the thing that stood out to me was the mixed final, which was the game of the tournament. I will maybe say the game of the tournament. I have to be honest, I wasn't at the first 2 days, but I was there for the finals, and it was a dramatic game between Fort Collins Shane and Minneapolis Dragon Thrust, 2 kind of heavy hitters in the mixed division. And for a long time, it felt like it was Dragon Thrust's game. They got a break early on, and they were kind of up a break. It was a tight game until nearly the end of the first half, and then they stayed on cruise control. Shame started sputtering, and all of a sudden, Shame were down in a 12-8 hole trying to come back. And in true Shame would argue Shame fashion, I would argue mixed division fashion. Shame all of a sudden, by putting so much pressure on Erica Bacon and Jason Cheetah, Dragon Thrust handlers, started to get turns going their way. Nick Snuska was a beast defensively, and then all of their receivers started making tight catches, and they came back and won it 15-14. It was sort of an incredible game, and unlike many of the matchups of Pro Champs where so many teams were missing key players due to Worlds rosters, it almost felt as though Shame and Dragon were kind of even after their Worlds rosters lost. They had Jane McLaughlin gone for Shame. Dragon had Sarah McStroth gone. Dragon also had Dylan DeClerc gone, but it didn't feel like that missing defender was the key piece necessarily. He probably ends up with at least a block in the game, but it came down to the wire. It was an exciting moment. I think the player that scored, it was her birthday, Love, Andrea Love, I think it was, they were all shouting happy birthday to her when she scored. It was a great ending, super fun game. I know everybody was watching Worlds at the time, but if you watch one game from Pro Champs, that's the one to go back and watch. It was really cool.
It was not that long ago. Was it not the 2022 Pro Championships where the shoe was on the other foot for Dragon Thrust? They came back from down 8-2 against Hybrid when I still remember the halftime interview where Dragon Thrust coach Carlo Mosca was like, "Oh yeah, we're totally in the game. We could totally make a comeback." And you're kind of like, well, that's just some coach speak. And then they turn around and they score like 6 in a row to end the game with the unbelievable comeback to win it. So now they've seen both sides of that coin as they gave up the run to Shame. Really close win over Exist for Shame in semifinals. I think Shame has had a bit of a disappointing season. They get the win over Hybrid, but Hybrid was missing some players for Worlds as well. But here they are. They win the Pro Championships. They beat Dragon Thrust. We see these two teams in the final. I think coming into the year, they were like arguably the number 1 and 2 teams. Depends on how you feel about BFG, I think, coming into the season. But have they reestablished themselves as title contenders in your mind based on what you saw?
They're definitely title contenders. I don't think they're the top title contenders necessarily. For me, in my mind, the mixed division right now is one of two things, because I haven't seen BFG in person. So it's either BFG and then a group of 7 or 8 teams who are competing for the title, or it's all 8 or 9 teams competing for the title. You throw New York Exist, Ann Arbor Hybrid, you get Dragon Thrust, Shame, BFG, Red Flag. I think after we're not going to really talk about sectionals, but after the way Disco Club cleaned up on the Rivals Public Enemy at sectionals, I think we have to consider them legit all the way as a nationals title threat. AMP is still in the mix, and maybe Mischief as well. It's a really deep field at the top.
I think I would say BFG has definitely earned the right to be at the top of the heap, but I don't know if I'd say they've completely separated enough to be in a tier of their own. That's I think where I'm at. Yeah, but I definitely firmly would make them number 1 as far as the favorites from this point moving forward. In the other divisions, in the men's division, Johnny Bravo gets the win over Dig in the final in a division heavily impacted by Worlds. Bravo wins 15-12 over Dig, but obviously a bunch of players missing. I mean, Truck Stop sent like half a team there. Really ridiculous kind of roster setup. I really wish these tournaments weren't at the same time. Any takeaways from this, or is it just kind of like, this information is just not that valuable?
Information is still valuable. My biggest takeaway, and this obviously comes from having watched the final in person, was just the sheer offensive brilliance of Bravo's big new pieces this year. Their two big additions are Tobias Brooks and Grant Lindsley, one very young player, one, I can't call him very old because I'm older than he is, but one extremely veteran player in Grant Lindsley. Both of them were outstanding this weekend. They were, along with Alex Atkins, just kind of like a three-person wrecking crew on offense. And the question I have after watching that is, I mean, it kind of looked like early season Ultimate. They were so easily getting off their hucks and getting into one-on-one matchups deep. And I wonder how that's going to play out if they will continue to be able to be that free and that on target when all of those U.S. world's level defenders and some of the international world's level defenders get back to the pitch. But, Dig were missing a lot of players as well in the final. We were talking about Toby de Krena with the Belgian team. Noah Bakker, who, killed it in the mixed final, was not with them. They had a bunch of injuries as well. But yeah, I mean, so that was my biggest takeaway, was just how good Bravo's new pieces are and how well they were integrating. And I talked to Grant Lindsley after the game. That was not just his first tournament with Bravo. That was his first time playing with or meeting most of the players on the team. So it was like immediate integration, which was pretty cool.
I feel like I want to buy fully on Bravo. I picked them to lose in the final to Machine, but I was pretty high on their ability to perform at this tournament. And I'm worried that I'm going to push my chips all in for this team because I wanted them to be really good and then they were. So it's like, okay, this confirms everything I already believed. I'm all in. Let's do it. It's like being really hopeful about your team, and then they go out and they play really well at the first tournament. And you're like, okay, we're going to be awesome. It's great. I know it's not their first tournament, but that's how I feel. So I don't want to like overemphasize these results, but I do think it's a really promising sign for Bravo's ability to compete. So I'm very optimistic about their chances down the stretch, and I would not be surprised if I pick them to make a very deep run at nationals. Women's division, Phoenix gets the win. Both Charlie and I had Phoenix in the final, but we didn't know who they would play against, and neither of us had them winning. But they were able to take it down despite the fact that they were missing, I think, 4 players for Worlds. And Bent was obviously missing their Colombian players as well. So despite those facts, those teams able to beat out the likes of Riot and Parcha and the leftovers of Molly Brown and Scandal. Leftovers sound so diminutive, but the players who weren't playing at Worlds for Molly Brown and Scandal, they're able to beat them out in semis and get into the finals. Phoenix gets the win in that one. What are your thoughts?
Really, really solid tournament win for Phoenix. They weren't just down their 4 Worlds players. They also had another 3 or 4 players on the sidelines injured. And I think they really showed off their depth, not just in the sense of they can, keep running legs out there, but their depth in the sense that they have multiple lines worth of players who can control a game. In the final, our producer, Lindsay Sue, had a great game. Claire Bidiger Curtis from the D-line had an absolutely incredible game. She was making plays all over the field, and she's really been doing it all season. Grace Connerly was spectacular hucking. Megan Manning is a really good player for them as well, kind of an off-disc specialist. I really liked what I saw in it. I think it's more than encouraging for Phoenix's chances down the road. They had the win over Brute Squad earlier in the year, but this is the one, I think this tournament win, between the win over Molly and the domination of Bent, I think this cements their status as in the title contending class. I'm not quite sure who I think the favorite is right now. Without the Cardenas twins and Claire Chastain for Molly, who knows what their ceiling is? Without Cami Groom and Claire Trope for Scandal, who knows what their ceiling is? Fury didn't even show up to this tournament. But I think, I think Phoenix have established themselves. They're in it. It would not surprise me if they made the national final this year in the women's division. I'll say without making a pick yet.
I think it would surprise me if they did that, but I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility, is what I'd say. It would surprise me, given the teams that would have to then miss the final. But Phoenix has it in them, but have we seen them really go out and get the big win lately? That it feels like has eluded them in a lot of cases. So I'll definitely reserve based on that. But you were there to see them in person, so you get to take the lap on this one.
They looked good, and I know exactly where they were missing. So I feel pretty confident about that. Bent were pretty good too. They didn't hang with Phoenix, especially early in the game. In the final, they turned it up in the second half, played better offense and much better defense in the second half. But Jenny De Jesus, as you might expect, was all over the field, tremendous. So was Ella Youngst. Ella Youngst was a goal-scoring machine. By the way, this is a stat note. Ella Youngst across PEC East, US Open, and Pro Champs was the leading goal scorer at each of those 3 tournaments in the women's division. Pretty incredible stat. I think she tied with somebody at one of those. I can't remember exactly who, but Ella Youngst was a beast, looking extremely athletic and confident out there. And shout out to a lot of the Bent players who had to step up. With Gina Cartagena and Abby Hecko both gone due to Worlds, those are 2 hub handlers for that team. So well played to Chris Nelson, as well as Caitlin Tien and who else? Tracy Lum all shouldered a lot of that handling work. And Jenny honestly stepped into that role some as well. And I thought they did a nice job. It wasn't good enough against Phoenix in that final. And they clearly missed those players. But at the same time, Bent's depth looks pretty good. Sydney Harris, not a handler, but also had a great tournament for them. And I will note that. I will note that Ella did get hurt partway through the final. Hope she's okay for the series because she needs it. She needs the big stage again.
Well, people, you're gonna start, scoring a goal at the front cone, and Ella Youngst is gonna apparate into the space and hold out a hand to collect rent because you've landed on her property. Like that's what we're getting to right now.
She's got 4 houses working on a hotel.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so go ahead and pitch your thumb and your pointer finger together, and then push them apart because we're zooming way in to sectionals right now. Club sectionals just starting up the postseason this past weekend. And Edward, you've got some juicy news. What are the haps at club sectionals this year?
There were some haps. I think the juiciest news, the one we have to start with, is the fact that Sprout, who were ranked something like 17 or 18 in our power rankings, and 16, like the last team out from earning a bid in USAU official rankings, are out. They had a 3-team section with 1 bid because Montreal Mephisto, who are a darn good team, did not play enough games to earn a bid to regionals, to Northeast regionals. They came in, beat them 13-10 in the upstate New York, Western New England? I think it's Western New England final. So Sprout are out of regionals. That is one less worry for the many hopefuls for one of those 3 Northeast bids.
And people news, are upset.
People are upset. It's probably going to be like a big mailbag topic at some point. What should we do about the Canadian teams? And actually, that was the biggest one to get knocked out, but that was not the only Canadian team. There were actually 2 more, one in each division, who came into a section without earning a bid to regionals and won the section. So shout out to Vancouver TT in the mixed division, who won the Washington sectionals, and as well as, I think they're called Ottawa NCT, a new team that I never heard of before, with names like Lauren Kimura and Terry Whitehead on it, came in and won upstate New York women's. And I think they're going to be a problem at Northeast Women's Regionals.
Just what Northeast Regionals needs is more problems.
Yeah, more problems, yeah. And then there are some tight matchups around the mixed division. We saw Space Force lost to Pyro, featuring some players from last year's Space Force team in June, kind of in the early season. They did it again in the Gulf Coast sectional final. Elsewhere in the Southeast, Charlotte Storm upset Durham Toro for, is it the second time this season they played? I can't remember if they played at Select Flight or not, but Storm took the North Carolina section. It all points to what's going to be a pretty spicy Southeast regionals. There are about 8 teams competing for 2 bids. Jack Williams did play for the team he's picking up with this year, Wilmington Flytrap. They finished 4th with Jack Williams playing. And they didn't have Sean Keegan playing this time. I assume Keegan's joining them for regionals. We'll see if that stirs the water too.
I'm sure everybody in Southeast Mixed is going to be totally uncomfortable with the idea of showing up with like 8 teams competing for whatever bids they get. It's totally unfamiliar territory for them, he said sarcastically. This has been the refrain in the Southeast for like 4 or 5 years now. It's one of those everybody feels like they have a shot tournaments. I feel like so it'll be another spicy one. I think I agree with you. It should be fun.
More.
Any other news?
Yeah, one more interesting result. We got Salt Lake Sego upsetting Montana Moondog in the Big Sky final. It's a team with some good names you know on it from various Salt Lake and Utah based teams and clubs. They did lose the day before in what was essentially a play-in game to regionals. The same matchup, Moondog took that one. So put your stock where you will in terms of which result of those two is more impressive. But yeah, Northwest was already interesting with 4 bids, but now with Sego winning the Big Sky section and TT coming down and winning the Washington section, there could be even more chaos.
Okay. Well, that's a pretty good rundown. I mean, that's pretty good for a weekend of Ultimate that I think many would just pass by, not even pay attention to. And it turned out there were actually quite a few storylines to catch up on in club. And we march forward towards regionals as we get further into the postseason. I have a feeling there's going to be some more surprises and potentially people mad about bids this or Canadians that along the way as we get closer to the final cut to get to nationals. So let's move on to our question of the week. But if you're 4 Canadian teams playing in the US series, go and without restriction, go ahead and like the video. And if you're against it, also like the video. So give us a thumbs up if you haven't already. Make sure to subscribe as well.
Thank you, Canada, for helping
question of the week.
Rage.
Hey, look, I got love for Canada, man. I got no beef. Shout out to the Huckabee podcast. Our question of the week this week comes from the Discord, which our subscribers have access to. You can shoot us ask your question of the week in the mailbag channel, and we may talk about it here on the show. This one came back in the conversation earlier in World's Week. This one came from, I believe, Tony Leonardo, who expressed a distaste for the term dirty hold. And as we had a lot of international commentary here, we get a lot of terminology conversations that I think are fun to have. So, Edward, are you for or against the term dirty hold?
It is not my biggest gripe about Ultimate language, but yeah, I think dirty hold is a silly term. I don't think we need to have an opposite term for clean hold. I don't think we need to say anything about a hold that is not clean. Certainly think we don't need to call it a dirty hold, which ranges from anything from a wrestling foul to a criminal offense, depending on who hears it.
I think mostly only the media should be using this term. This is a additional way to describe the game that should not be part of the common lexicon. People should know what it is, but like this is a verbal flourish, not a useful term, in my opinion. So fortunately, in the Discord thread, somebody replied, putting forth what I would say is my idea for this, which is somebody I took it from somebody else on Twitter, which is using O or D to describe whether the point where you started on O or D, and then the number of possessions that you took to score. So you scored on offense in 2 possessions, it's an O2. Like let's keep it simple. This I know that this introduces the problem of I've had people push back on this. Well, if you do D1 and D2 or D3, people call their defenses that, or they call their D lines that. Well, it's a problem that you're already using this term in 2 different ways that could be confusing anyway. But it's also really easy to come up with other solutions for those things. We already have other terms that are in use to describe different lines or different defenses. So I don't actually think we need, I think the D1, D2 thing being used like that is a fairly new convention. I hadn't heard it until like maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So I think we're not really married to that. We can take that away and use it for this, which I think it's much more applicable and informative for. So that's my pitch. Edward, any more thoughts on dirty holds or other options?
Yeah, I mean, no, I think we've said all needs to say about dirty hold. I like your system. I think it makes sense. And as usual, you are, I think, one of the leaders of ultimate terminology. I think we can all agree about that. And because of that, I want to ask you about a word that's been around for a long time now. For like 15 years, it's been in the common parlance. I'm not a fan, but I want to know what you think of the word dishy as a noun for that little pass, to the handler coming up from behind an undercut to get the little flip pass. How do you feel about using the word dishy in a sentence like that?
I would never do it. It's not how I would ever describe the pass. It's just not a word that I like really enjoy saying or using, but I also don't mind it. If somebody uses it, it doesn't like make me cringe. It's just not the word for me. I've also heard it called a bounce or a bump. Those I feel like are bump, maybe the second most common term or the most common term along with dishy. I've also used dish as opposed to dishy. I think dishy evolved from dish, but not something I have a strong feeling about. It sounds like you're strongly against it.
It makes my hair stand on end. I don't know why.
Everybody's got to have their icks,
problem.
my friend.
Getting suggestions that it can also be called a hitch or a chip. I support all of these options. I just
whoa. Hitch is already used. A hitch is the centering pass from the handler to the thrower, right? That's a hitch. I think a lot of people already call it that.
That's what I grew up calling it, but I haven't heard anybody say that in 10 or 15 years. So I think we can use that term for something else.
I do think it's kind of dying, but the hitch pass. But yes, I've never heard it used for that. This is coming from our producer Lindsay Sue, who said hitch is the next term. But anyway, that's going to do it for it.
They are so upset with us right now.
Before we make them even more upset, let's wrap up. That's going to do it for this week's Deep Look. Charlie probably back from Australia unless he decides to gallivant around the world even more next week, and he'll be back. But plenty to talk about. We got more worlds to go through, world games to preview. That's what Edward and I will be doing in the sub bonus. We'll catch you next time here on Deep Look.
Bring me back a wombat, Charlie.